Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background on myself. I was born and pretty much raised in the Dominican Republic. I didn't come to the US until I was about 10 years old. A lot of people don't know that that's actually where the Middle Passage started. And in 1509 was the first time that they took the first enslaved Africans to the Dominican Republic to work in the sugarcane fields. Now, it's important to understand that prior to colonization, the Europeans and the Africans had a long-standing history of trade and diplomacy. And because of that is where they knew where to go find people who were experts at growing and working with specific crops. Okay, so I tell people that I've experienced racism in two languages, and I've also experienced it as an insider and an outsider. An outsider because I was born in a different country. When I came here, I had to learn to speak English. And as an insider because I've had an African American experience, because people look at me and they just assume that I'm African American. They don't realize that I'm Afro Latina. This is my family. I've learned to do nothing without, just really getting the permission of my ancestors, because there's a reason that I'm here, and it has to do with them. So in the middle, you see my parents. And there are things that I learned from my parents that still carry me through to this day, as it would with a lot of you, right? From my mother, I learned compassion, forgiveness, and not holding a grudge. From my father, I learned technology, the importance of technology, the importance of research, and how important it is to learn to connect the dots so that you can get a greater sense of what your life is and why you're here. The children over here are my siblings. Most of them are gone. The only one that is left is my brother, Herman, and who knows how long he'll be here. We expect he'll be here for a very long time. He's 85, 86 years old. And my mother used to say, oh, Herman will last forever because nothing ever bothered him, okay? The beautiful woman here on the side is my sister. She was an amazing seamstress and designer of clothing. And this is her wedding dress that she designed, and it had 120 little hand-covered buttons on it. Over here is my father. When he was a young boy, he went to private school in the DR, and he had a high school diploma at a time where a lot of people in the Dominican Republic didn't know how to read and write. And eventually he used to run the antenna company in our town. This little picture back here is my grandmother. And I realized the other day why that picture looks like that. My grandmother didn't like to have her picture taken. So my brother had my two nieces stand in front of my grandmother and pretended to be taking a picture of my nieces so he could get my grandmother in the picture. I am an artist. I think as an artist. I process as an artist. In some of the African traditions, shamans and artists are considered to be in the same realm because they consider that both artist and shaman can travel between the worlds. What that means is that you go into the world of the imagination and you come back into the world of reality, the world that we live in, with new ideas and new ways of seeing things, new ways of healing, new ways of bringing color and form and music and all those kinds of things into the world. I am also, let's go back. I hit that little admittance thing. I'm a musician and I was trained to play the vocal cords. I love music. I used to love opera and I was a Carlatura. I had the privilege of studying with some wonderful teachers from the Metropolitan Opera House in New York. And I'm really glad that I got that training because later on it served me, and you'll see in the ways that it served me. And the reason that I'm giving you background information is because who I am today and the way that I facilitate the healing racism process comes from all the experiences that I've had in my life, because there were no schools teaching, healing racism 30 years ago. They still aren't. Okay, we have some anti-racism stuff that the colleges are now starting to teach, but for the most part, people forget about the healing piece, and that's really what I focus on. I was a military spouse for 13 years and was a spouse during Desert Storm. I have been and continue to be a sound therapist. I'm a Reiki master and teacher, and I used to teach meditation as well as I taught A Course in Miracles. My calling was given to me the day that Dr. King died. I locked myself in the bathroom to cry, and my father kept knocking on the door asking if I was okay in there. I didn't want him to know that I was crying. And I was crying because of the death of Dr. King, but I was also crying for myself because I really heard that I was to continue the work. And I didn't know what that meant. But as a child, as a teenager, what I knew was somebody just killed that man for doing that work. So I'm not doing it. Like, I can find somebody else. I'm not doing it. And I fought it and resisted it for most of my life. But there came a time when I have delved deeply enough into my own healing and transformation that I could no longer say no to the calling. And as a result, I've been doing this work now for over 30 years. I've written 3 books on the subject, and I wrote those books. Those books literally came out of the 20-something years of practice of doing this work and realizing that people, like, we're not raised to be race literate in our country. And we also are not raised to have good, healthy conversations on race. And the healthcare field rarely, if ever, talks about race from the perspective of, just having a conversation with a patient about the various ways that race and racism impacts their lives and thereby their health. So in the past 30 years, I've been a coach, and I do race equity coaching. I have worked with a lot of corporate leaders and as well as members of Congress on this topic of race. So let's get into it. So what is grief? So grief is a deep sadness. And let me just move this as well. And when we talk about grief, what we're talking about is the natural outcome of having suffered some kind of a loss, okay? So when it comes to grief, we grieve about a variety of things. So we grieve about, having lost a loved one, loss of community, loss of a job. If someone loses their home or their possessions, people grieve around those things. We don't always acknowledge some of those things as grief. And the other things that we don't acknowledge are things like the loss of freedom, the loss of innocence, which would be, a belief system, an ideology, or something that you thought was true or real, and then you find out that it's not. And we also grieve a loss of vision or the loss of dreams. Generally, grieving is affiliated with bereavement, which is the loss of a human being, okay? But grief also has connotations in the physical body, in the cognitive, in the behavioral, the social, the cultural, the spiritual. There are implications of grief in all of those realms. And grief happens at the mind, body, spirit, and emotions. Prolonged oppression causes grief, okay? So what happens with prolonged oppression is that it becomes depression in the physical body. And grief can be, we walk through the stages of grief, unconscious, self-conscious, or conscious. So unconscious grief would be, maybe you had a loss of innocence, something happened to that you suddenly realize, wow, things aren't the way that you thought they were, right? And your mind, your body, your emotions are in grief, but you're not necessarily consciously aware of that. But someone outside of you, a friend, a loved one, may suddenly say, oh, are you okay? And, because they see that something's off. but you're not necessarily aware that you're grieving. So that's unconscious grief. Self-conscious grief is when you're carrying the grief in a way that other people see it, but you don't want people to know that you're grieving. Like, let's say it's the loss of a relationship. And let's say it's a relationship that your friend said to you, oh, you should have been out of that relationship a long time ago, right? And now suddenly you are out of the relationship, and you're still grieving for the loss of the relationship, and you're embarrassed to let your friends know that you're grieving. And so you do your best to hide it, and you go on with your life. And then somebody says to you, oh, could somebody, can you turn off your microphone? Could everyone turn off their mics?
Yep, I got it, yep.
Thanks. And so you have people that see that something is off with you, right? And they think you shouldn't be grieving for that relationship because they thought it was a bad relationship for you, but you're still grieving because you suffered a loss, okay? And so they say something to you about, oh, you shouldn't be grieving about that, and you start defending it, right? Because you are self-conscious about it. If you're conscious about your grief, you're aware that you're grieving, you know what you're grieving about, and you may or may not know what to do about it, but you're at least conscious. You're awake to the fact that you are grieving. As a nation that has institutionalized racism, we are a nation of grief. Okay, racism is not natural. The whole idea of race isn't natural. There's no biological markers that make one human being different from another. What makes us look different, especially when it comes to skin color, is melanin. Melanin is something that the human body created as protection against the strong sun, and people who live in places or whose biological tribe developed in places where there's a lot of sunlight and there's a lot of heat, you'll find that their skin is dark. And the more the more lineage they have that developed in those warm, hot climates with a lot of sun, the darker their skin is. You'll find that the darker a person's skin is, the less hair they have on their skin, because hair is one of those things that keeps the body warm. When you start going to northern, colder climates, you'll find that people have less melanin because it's less sunlight. Remember, their summer is, if it's long, it's considered long. It's like 3 full months, right? They only have 3 months to grow their food, so they tended to be smaller people because they had less food available to them. You also find that their hair grows really fast because the body needs the hair, and you'll find that they're very hairy. You'll find that the body needs the hair because hair keeps the body warm, okay? So the human body is a marvel of technology. Because human beings were created to be creatures of connection, okay? When you have a society that's based on segregation, the body grieves, the mind grieves, the heart grieves. Human beings were not created to live in isolation of one another. They were created to be community beings and to live together and find ways to live in harmony. But human beings were not created. In fact, we would not have survived had we not been tribal. So human beings are naturally tribal. So when you create systems of segregation, what you're doing is creating forms of oppression that don't allow human beings to express in the way that human beings need to express through relationships and friendships and things like that are natural to human beings. And when you institutionalize that, when you turn that into law, then what you're doing is you're creating a form of oppression that everybody buys into, while they may not necessarily be aware of it. And I'll explain that as we go through this process. So as a result of unconscious and semi-conscious oppression, we are the third highest nation when it comes to dealing with depression. okay? Because remember what I said earlier, oppression becomes depression in the human body, okay? So we're gonna look at grief through the stages of the Kubler-Ross model, which are the stages of death and dying. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of death and dying, she worked in hospice, and people were, you know, in her work, she noticed that people went through a process when they were told that they were going to die. And so we're going to walk through that, but we're going to walk through it looking at it from the perspective of race and racism in our nation. Now, I want to give us, before I go into the stages, I'm going to give us a little bit of background, because I know that some of you were not in the first programs that we did. So racism has 4 dimensions. It's institutional, systemic, internalized, and interpersonal. For the most part, we try to solve racism from the interpersonal perspective. So somebody says something, and we act, react, and interact around that, right? And we don't always take into consideration that we are acting, reacting, and interacting with each other based on what we've internalized, which is the institutional and the systemic. How we institutionalize something is we turn it into law. Then we set up systems so that everybody has to follow the law, okay? And when we do that, what comes through on the other side is that we internalize what is in the environment, what has been created, the umbrella that we live under. And as a result of that, we interact with one another based on what we've institutionalized. Okay, so those are the 4 dimensions: institutional, systemic, internalized, and interpersonal. Okay. Because we live in a racial caste system that was established over 500 years ago. Remember what I said, that the first enslaved Africans to the New World were brought in the 1500s, okay? Because we have been living under this umbrella, wait, let me backtrack. It's estimated that there were about 15 million Africans that were taken from the African continent to serve as unpaid laborers in the so-called New World. Out of that 15 million, it is estimated that approximately 6 million survived. Out of the 6 million that survived the Middle Passage, around 400,000 were brought to the continental USA. That is what the information from the ships is telling us, okay? So that left a lot of millions of people, a lot of millions of Africans that did not come to the continental USA. They were taken to Central, South America, and the Caribbean. And in fact, the first enslaved people were taken to the Caribbean because the one thing that you can do in the Caribbean that may be iffy in, you know, several different parts of the world is you can grow food 365 days a year, okay? And then you can take that food and you can sell it in Europe and make money. There's also a lot of natural resources. In fact, I want to say like 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago, they found a new vein of gold in the Dominican Republic, and the Canadians were trying to take it out of there. Okay, so a lot of natural resources. The same thing with in Africa and so on, and South America. Minas Gerais in Brazil is still active today. So you have a lot of natural resources. You have gold, you have diamonds, you have silver in all of these places, and all of that wealth was taken out of these places and brought to Europe. Okay, and it still is. A lot of that wealth is still being brought to European countries. So, and we never talk about that, you know. But that's important to understand that, because that's part of the whole stuff, right? Like that's part of the thing that we're looking at and having to sort through today. So the Spaniards created a caste system that would allow people to understand who could inherit, okay? And so who could inherit was the firstborn male who was born from two Europeans that were living under a legalized marriage, okay? That's really important to understand, legalized marriage. Because if you are, let's say you are a European male, and you mate with a native woman or with an African woman, and the firstborn child of one of those women is a firstborn male, that child cannot inherit. Not only were they born out of wedlock, right, but they made blended marriages, or what some people call mixed marriages, illegal. They made them illegal. They made sure that everybody knew that same-sex marriages were illegal, because same-sex marriages could not produce any more workers for the system. So they had to make everything, unless it was two heterosexual European mating and having a child, everybody else's relationships were made illegal. Okay, so that's how you institutionalize stuff. And then you set up a system that everybody has to follow. And if they don't follow the system, there's punishment around that. Okay, so I hope this is making sense. Okay, so let's so fast forward, okay, and this is all this. I mean, I'm just barely scratching the surface around this stuff. I'm putting together. I like to do my seminars in person, but I'm putting together some of these seminars as webinars, so that we can go deeper into understanding the history, because if you're going to dismantle something, you need to at least know how it was constructed, why it was constructed, so that you can understand also how it's maintained, okay? So, so as a result of people not being told the real stories, not being told how this stuff was set up, people are doing the best they can with some of the stuff, and some people are using it to continue to divide people. So here's what happens. The whole institution, because it was set up on a caste system, right? Everyone, depending on the color of their skin, was given a piece of that caste system to uphold. For instance, if you were white, your part of the caste system was based on supremacy. If you are a brown person, your part of the caste system is based on colonization. If you are a Black person, your part of the caste system is based on enslavement. Okay, so here we are. Fast forward, and by the way, people act, react, and interact based on that stuff if they're not conscious. So, for instance, you turn on the TV and you turn on the news, and there's an older white male who's saying, I don't understand why they keep saying so-and-so is a racist. I know that person really well. That person is not a racist. Well, guess what? As a white male, you can't tell, okay? You can't, because what you have internalized is the supremacy piece. So you look out into the world through the eyes of the supremacy, you hear the world through the ears of the supremacy, and you speak to the world through the mouth of the supremacy, okay? So I hope that's making sense. And so as a result, if a person of color says to this white person, wow, what you just said was really racist, you know what they hear? They hear, I'm a bad person. Because as part of the supreme people, right? Your caste piece is to be a good person, a rich person, someone who's very deserving, blah, 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 blah. Like we could just break it down, right? Like we could spend days unpacking just that, right?
Well, I guess
And
so let you know we're about 30 minutes in.
Okay, and so when you hear that person say what you just said is racist, and you're hearing it through the ears of supremacy, okay, what you're hearing is not aligned with what you've been told you are. Okay, it's not aligned with what you've been told you are. So you hear it and you get offended, right? The hard piece around this is to tell people you're not really qualified to say what is racist and what isn't because you don't have the lived experience. And and again, I'm not trying to be offensive to anyone, but it is what it is, right? If you have been, and by the way, children are racialized by the time they're 3 years old. If you don't believe it, look up the doll tests on the web. So if you've been raised to believe certain things about yourself, and you have a history that supports that belief system, when someone comes in and says something to the contrary, you're going to hear it through the filters of offense, and you're going to get defensive, right? And so as a result, what happens when we're having these conversations on race is that people are speaking past each other, because people are speaking from what they have internalized from the system that's been put together. And I always like to tell, I'm just going to say this really quick story, and then we'll go through the process of grief, because the reason we're grieving is because we don't tend to the losses that we suffer on a regular basis as human beings, as just human beings, okay? So I was living under a dictatorship, and I picked up some things like you never say anything bad about the government and blah, 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 things like that, right? That was when I was a little child in the DR. Fast forward, I'm now an adult, my children are adults, and I say things. This is where your unconscious bias comes from, okay? I say things and they're like, wow, that must be a throwback back for mom, right? Because I'm speaking from the biases that I've internalized from having grown up in that system, okay? I'm not always conscious of it. Doesn't make me a bad person or a good person. That's the reality of it. So that's what we call unconscious bias. So when it comes to race, all people have biases of all kinds. We wouldn't have survived without them. They help human beings survive. The thing is that not all of our biases are institutional and systemic. Racial biases are institutional and systemic, and we've internalized, and then we interact with each other out of it, okay? So I wanted to give you that as a backdrop, so that as we go through this, you'll be able to grasp it from a different perspective. So the first stage of grief is denial, and denial is the stage where it's like, denial happens because human beings are actually wired for love, and they're wired for connection, okay? And so if we live in a system that requires that we be separate from one another, one of the ways that we survive is we go into denial. And there are white folks that are in denial, there are brown folks that are in denial, and there are black folks that are in denial, because what happens is that in order to continue to live in a difficult situation, in a situation that is not akin to the human spirit, okay, that is counter the human spirit, which is connection, we go into denial. And denial allows us to continue to live with situations that we know are not good for us, but we do it anyway. One of the things that denial allows us to do is to not have to do something about it. You know what I mean? Because in denial, it's sort of like, well, you just kind of pretend that there's nothing wrong. Here's the thing. People of color, and particularly Black people, have not been allowed to really live in denial, because you have to know how to stay safe in the society. So you can't afford to do denial, okay? It doesn't serve us to do denial. But sometimes people do the best they can, to try to say, oh, I never experienced racism, or, like those forms of denial. So denial allows us to live with difficult situations. But what happens is at some point we become conscious and we go into anger. And anger can be either implosive or explosive. And implosive anger can look like, treating yourself badly, doing some harm to yourself, alcoholism, drug abuse, those kinds of things, self-destructive behavior. Explosive anger could be, lashing out, beating people up, you know, being in a position where you have the power to take a human life, or, you know, things like that. Those are forms of explosive anger. Explosive anger. The next stage is bargaining. And here's the thing. When it comes to race, we do a lot of bargaining. In organizations, we go, well, if we just do diversity and we include everybody, could we just skip the race piece, okay? Or if we, you know, it's the stage where if I this, then I that. It's where we bargain, you know, and negotiate to try to get into or out of things that we don't want to do. And when it comes to race, we do that a lot. We do a lot of bargaining. We you know, if we set up, you know, a system that allows people to, you know, that takes care of the women and the children, then they won't miss the men when we throw them in jail. Okay? Like, I mean, I'm talking serious bargaining that we do, and we're not always conscious of it. And the thing about bargaining is that we have to be careful with it, because we have, one of the first things we learn on the planet is bargaining, right? So you, and somebody comes and they pick you up, somebody changes your diaper, somebody feeds you. So you figure out real fast that if you want something done, all you got to do is scream, okay? And so, you know, by the time you're a teenager, you're bargaining for the car keys. You know, if I do all my homework, you know, can I get the car keys or whatever, you know? But we do that all the time. We bargain in relationships. And negotiation isn't good or bad, right or wrong, but we have to be conscious of how we are using those negotiations and how much we are willing to give away. Because sometimes we give away people's lives, and we need to become conscious of that. When we bargain and we give away the store, right? And we get what we wanted, because if I this, then I that. If I give away the store, can I just have some peace, right? And you get the peace, and then you realize, oh, the store's now gone. Now how am I gonna make a living, right? So you bargain, you got what you asked for. But the interesting thing about that is that even though you got what you asked for, you're not happy. So we get depressed. Depressed is the stage where it's never gonna get any better. It's never gonna look any different. It's the, you know, so depression is the never gonna stage. When it comes to race, you hear people say, oh, it's never gonna change. Oh, it's never, you know, it's like, no, well, if people don't get good information, it's not. But when people get good information, they make good decisions. I've had a lot of experiences with people who had bad information, making bad decisions. When they got good information, they made different decisions. In my work, in 30 years of doing this work, what I found is that there are people who are just, I'm gonna use the word, okay, evil. Okay, they're just people who are just evil. They just like, they don't give a crap. They just want to be mean and nasty and horrible. Okay, but the majority of the people that I've met on this journey want to do the right thing, and a lot of them just don't even know how, because no one is breaking the stuff down for them, and no one is explaining that it's difficult to do negotiation when two people are speaking different languages. By that, I mean, if you are speaking the language of colonization to someone who only knows how to speak supremacy, you're not going to understand each other. When I first came to this country, I didn't know any English. My whole family is completely bilingual. Everybody was bilingual. My mother was born Dutch, and she became an American citizen when the Virgin Islands were sold to, the Dutch sold the Virgin Islands to the United States. But my whole family was always bilingual. I was the only one who didn't speak English, and I was the baby. And so they kind of let me do whatever the heck I wanted. So I came to this country and I had to learn to speak the language. When I first came here, people would speak, and they would speak to me, and I didn't know what they were saying. So once I learned the language, then I could speak it. But for those of you who have read a book called The Five Love Languages, it's how I explain it is like you are a quality time person. You just love spending quality time with the people you love. But you're partnered with somebody who is an acts of service person. So they'll work, serving the community. They will do things to serve you, and they'll work 6.5 days a week to do whatever it is that they believe is going to make you feel loved, because they're trying to love you through their language. Okay. And so what you say to them is, you don't love me because you never spend any time with me. And the other person goes, why would you say that when I do everything I can to make sure that you're happy? Right? Because for them, making you happy through their filters looks like working 6.5 days a week. Through your filters, it looks like sitting in front of the TV and watching a movie with me, or spending time going on a picnic or going for a walk together. Okay. So your languages are coming through your filters, right? And so through the filters of whatever piece you're talking through, you may or may not understand. Let me say this. Because Black and brown people have been forced to serve white people for hundreds of years, Black and brown people know white people really well. It also has to do with survival and lived experience around the racial stuff. So they can speak your language, right? Even when you may not be able to speak theirs. To the point of, I have friends who have had Black and brown people serving their family for years, and they knew that person's first name. They didn't know the person's last name. Possibly the parents who paid them knew, but they didn't know. They didn't know anything about that person. But the person who was doing the service knew them intimately. They had to. Okay, so I hope this makes sense. Okay. Eventually, when we start to understand the process, we get to a place of acceptance. Acceptance can be a powerful stage if we use it well. So for instance, in the Kubler-Ross model, a person who was told that they were going to die, they go into depression. Eventually, some of them, not all of them, some of them died in depression. Eventually, they would get to a place of acceptance. And acceptance meant, oh, wow, you know what? I'm still alive. That book that I wanted to write, I'm going to write that now. Oh, I always wanted to spend more time with the grandchildren. I'm going to spend more time with the grandchildren now. So in a place of acceptance, like, I'm going to die, but right now I'm still alive, so I can do something, okay? I can make things different for myself and right now, okay? So when it comes to acceptance, when it comes to race, what that stage looks like is, I didn't know, there were things about this that I didn't understand, right? But I understand them now, so maybe there's something I can do to change my own behavior, or I can learn more, I can become more race literate, I can become more educated, I can learn more, I can have different conversations with people. I have an awareness that there are times that I speak through the filters of my own awareness and not the filters of others. And maybe I can learn to understand and speak that language so that we can find a common ground, a common place from which to speak, okay? But, and I'm also gonna say, this is where the Kubler-Ross model ends. The Kubler-Ross is part of the 12-part stages of healing that I teach in my seminars. So I'm gonna give you one of those stages. And that stage is re-engagement. Re-engagement happens after you've come to a place of acceptance and understanding around this stuff. So you engage with it differently than you did before you had the experience, okay? Or before you knew, or before you understood that there are four dimensions of race that we all, or the fact that we all live under a caste system. It was before, so now you're not there anymore. Now you have some information, but you still have to engage with the toxicity out there. So at this point, you can re-engage with race the way that you've always engaged with it, or you can choose differently, because you've just walked through a process that gives you information that you can now use to understand your own filters and the filters of others. Our nation, when it comes to that process, our nation flounders between denial. I mean, now we're like, it's amazing what's happening now. Believe me, 30 years of doing this work and seeing what's happening now, to me, it's like nothing short of a miracle, okay? So people are moving out of the denial state. There's still a lot of people in denial, okay? And a lot of people are in anger. And some people are bargaining with this stuff still. And some people are depressed about it. And this is not linear, okay? You can go from denial to acceptance like that, or you can move in and out of the stages, and all of the stages, every one of the stages has all of the stages in it. So for instance, you can be in denial about your anger. When you're in denial about your anger, your friends go, "Are you angry?" And you go, no, I'm not angry, okay? You can be angry about your anger. I am so angry about this. I don't know that I'm ever gonna stop being angry. You can bargain with your anger. Well, maybe if I count to 10 or I take a deep breath, I won't be so angry. Because remember, is the if I this, then I that, right? You can be depressed about your anger, which anger can lead to depression, and depression is a form of anger that we don't act out, right? Like we haven't dealt with. And so you'll find that, you can be in acceptance of your anger, okay? Or you can re-engage with your anger from a different perspective than you did when you first started. Okay, so I hope all of this is making sense. So you just walk through a process. We have 10?
10 minutes, yep, we're at 12:50.
Perfect. Yay, thank you, that's perfect. So we've just walked through this process, right? And I want to say something about racial sobriety. So Dr. Father Clarence Williams, when I met him in 2000, and he was with the Detroit Archdiocese. And he had written a book called, it was his thesis, and it was Recovery. It was called Recovery from Everyday Racisms, with an S, racisms, okay? And he subsequently wrote this book which was based on the original book, Recovery from Everyday Racisms. He wrote a book called Racial Sobriety. And I studied with him, and I told him, I totally recognize this, because he used the Kubler-Ross model. I said, that's the stages, I've lived these, and this is what I move through on a regular basis. So I totally recognized it. And then I got permission from him to change some of the stages and to add stages so that it would be a more complete, more holistic mind, body, spirit, and emotions healing process. So I have 12 stages that I walk people through. But traditionally, I've walked people through just the Kubler-Ross stages on a weekly basis, and it's completely transformed the way that they view race. I do a 2-day seminar where people leave there and they never see race the same way again. Because what it does is it gives people some of the pieces so that they have something to hang all of the belief systems and the things that they thought about race. It gives them context, because a lot of this stuff has been decontextualized. We haven't gotten the history. We haven't gotten a lot of the information that allows us to make the transformation. And so when I do this work, my goal is to give people some of that stuff so that they can then do the processing that they need to do in mind, body, spirit, and emotions, so that they can expand their learning. and become more race literate and ultimately remain racially sober. So the re-engagement stage is a powerful, powerful stage because it's the stage where you can choose differently because you now have new and different information. So you can make different choices. So I'm gonna stop here. Where are we with time?
12:53.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're gonna take a nice deep breath and blow it out. And I always tell people that it's important to understand that racism lives in your body. It lives in your physical body. And so we're gonna go to the body to create peace in that in the physical body so that you can feel that, right? And so the easiest way to feel that is through contrast. And so those of you who have already done this exercise, you know what that's like. For those of you who are new, I want you to put everything down and put your feet flat on the ground and feel your bottom as it hits the chair. And I want you to take a nice deep breath and blow it out. And I want you to imagine that your inner eyes and your inner feelings, that you have access to inner vision, and see if you notice where you're storing racism in your body. So take a nice deep breath and then silently say to yourself, racism, racism, racism. And notice if you can feel that in your body. Take a nice deep breath, blow it out. And now say to yourself silently, peace, peace. I am peace. Nice deep breath. Blow it out. And Kip, let's open it up for a minute to see who could feel the difference, and let's get a couple people who can just speak to the different feelings around that. So who could feel the difference between racism and peace in their bodies? So let's have a couple people who can speak to that.
Go ahead, Whitney.
Hello, how are you?
Good.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, thank you for volunteering, Whitney.
Absolutely. Milagros, we met long time ago. I've been getting your messages for years and have ignored them up until this moment.
You and a lot of other people.
I felt it in my throat, right in this tightness that sat on my chest, and just, I can feel it. Oh, I can feel the emotion too.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
right here.
Yeah. What about peace?
It was interesting when I said peace, my throat relaxed, but the weight on my chest was still there.
Mm-hmm. Keep saying peace and imagine that the word peace is written on your chest. And just allow that, let that energy move. Okay. Thank you so much, Whitney. Okay, let's have one more person.
Yeah, go ahead, Ann. Ann N.
So I could feel the tension in my shoulders, which is often where I feel tension. Mm-hmm. And I do some form of meditation already, so I could feel the release come really in my upper chest as my heart began to slow with just the word peace, and allowing peace to penetrate my spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's have one more person, Kip.
Let's see.
Thank you so much, Anna.
There was one. Oh, Kate Snyder King, do you want to go ahead? You were here last week, and you said that you're feeling something different this time.
Mhm.
Hi. Yeah. Should I like get my video here?
Up to you.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, great.
Hi. It's
Hi.
been really interesting for me. The first week, I felt my throat constrict,
Mhm.
and I didn't know how to start the conversation with people around racism.
Mm.
Last week, I was telling Kip that I was flat on my back, like paralyzed, like I couldn't get out of a chair. My whole body just froze.
Mm.
And this week, the feeling is in my ears. And I think that it's telling me that I need to sit back and listen to those that have suffered and be compassionate. And then when you said peace, it really just helped calm me down.
Mhm.
So I feel like there has been a progression over the last 3 weeks, and I want to thank you so much.
Mm.
Really, thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Yeah. So what happens is that this stuff is stuck in our bodies. And for those of you who could feel it, you probably felt it as something that wasn't moving. It's just sort of like a lump there kind of thing. Which is a lot of stagnant energy and stagnant emotions. Okay. And so when we say the word peace, it literally is energy in motion. The energy begins to move. It begins to flow. And if you do that enough, like if all you do is practice feeling peace in your body and allowing peace, allowing that movement energy to go to the places where that energy's stuck, you'll start to feel that things will start to move, literally move, okay? Because that stuff is literally standing in the way and people aren't even aware of it. So thank all three of you for volunteering to share your experiences. This is why I do healing racism work, because there's a healing that needs to happen for all of us around this topic. Just imagine all you're doing is saying the word racism, or all you're doing is saying the word peace, and you can feel the difference. Can you imagine when you're involved in something that happens that's racially charged? Or even, people find that they have a hard time speaking about race, right? That's because the stress response gets activated when we're talking about race, because the stuff lives in your body. Okay, that's why. And so that's one of the places, that's not all of it, that's one of the places where we need to go and do some healing work and some movement work, and allow that stuff to begin to move, because it's been stagnant. So let's take a nice deep breath again. Blow it out, and let's just do a very quick meditation. So I want you to, again, just put your feet flat on the ground, and I want you to imagine that you can, again, look inside your body with your inner eyes, and you notice that there's a beautiful light, a small little light, but it's really bright, and it's shining in the center of your chest. And I want you to imagine that light is getting larger and larger. It's filling your entire body. And just inhale and exhale out of that light. Imagine that light, you can inhale into it and exhale out of it. And as you do that, the light becomes brighter and brighter. And I want you to imagine that you can take racism and bring that racism from wherever it is in your body and bring it into the light. And for those of you who feel like you can't do that, then imagine that the light is shining brightly, like it's like a beam of that light is shining like a laser right on the place where that energy stuck. And that energy begins to dissipate. And imagine that peace and love are the energies that you're bringing into that space. So you're radiating peace and you're radiating love. And you're allowing that to dissolve that energy in your body. And inhale and exhale out of that beautiful light. And just allow it to dissolve. Just let it delete. Let it completely dissolve. And notice how your energy gets brighter and brighter. And imagine that you can connect this beautiful peace and love energy to the entire world. Just let it get larger and larger and let it flow out of you, filling the room, your neighborhood, the state, your country, and the entire world with this beautiful light of peace and love that connects all of us on a regular basis. Take a nice deep breath. Blow it out. And come back into the space. Take another nice deep breath. Blow it out. And let's open it up for questions.
Great. So if you have a question, you can type it in the chat to me or use the raise hand function. Milagros, the first question is, how, as a Black woman, can I have compassion for a white individual who is voicing their newfound acceptance when what they are finding out is something we've known for generations? So this person says, it makes me angry to hear, I never knew this happened, when this has always been my reality.
Mm-hmm. So this is why it's important to understand the 3 levels of conditioning, because and as difficult as it may sound, we're going to have to learn to have patience and compassion with one another. See, the thing is, and I completely understand your anger, and believe me, I had to go through a process where all this rage had to come out of me, okay, before I could do this work the way that I do it now. Because I wouldn't be able, because I was so angry. It's like, so I completely understand the anger piece. The thing about that, and let me also say, it is extremely important to not sweep that anger piece under the rug for any of us, okay? Because as white folks start to awaken, they're going to go into anger and rage because of the way that this has affected them. So let me say this. The whole system, remember I talked about the caste system? The whole system is a system of oppression, okay? The difference is that people of color and Black folks know they're oppressed. Whites don't, because their oppression is hidden behind privilege, so they don't see it. They're not meant to see it. Their story, their history is a myth that has been given to them in order to be able to manipulate them and keep them at a level of understanding that infantilizes them. And this may be harsh to hear, but it is what it is, okay? If you live under a patriarchal system, you're needed to be an infant so that you can be manipulated. So it's kind of like being a kid in school and your parents always doing your homework for you. But they don't really tell you that they're doing their homework for you. They have you write it down, but they give you the answers, okay? So it's that level of conditioning. And so as a result, they don't see it. We had to see it because not seeing it meant that we weren't going to be safe, right? Here's the thing. As people of color, so this is, let me backtrack. There are two things that are important to understand. Racism is a problem for people of color. It is not the problem of people of color, and people of color cannot solve racism. We can't. We have the other piece to solve, which is the way that we internalize the oppression, okay? Whites have to solve racism because that is their share of the caste system, okay? But in order for them to be able to be conditioned in a way that maintains the system the way that it's maintained, they've been told a lot of untruths about their history. Like white folks, for the most part, they don't know their Black history. They don't think they have a Black history, okay? But they do, right? Not only through ancestry, right? Like we're all related and we're all Africans, and regardless of where, you know, what our skin color is, we're all Africans. It's estimated that it takes about 20,000 years for what is known as Black skin to become what is known as white skin. That's what the scientists are telling us, because you don't have as much sun and you know, and you need all these things to survive in colder climates and so on. But and so a lot of us people of color lose patience with whites. You have to understand that they don't always see the stuff, right? And the ones that see it try to run back into denial because it's too scary for them, all right? However, we're gonna have to be patient with each other as we work through, because it's all of us, okay? The oppression has affected all of us as we work through this, because if white folks don't get it, your Black and brown children ain't never gonna be safe. I'm gonna tell you that right now. That's the truth, okay? So I understand the frustration. I understand the anger, believe me. Believe me, 30 years later, it's like, sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, why are they calling me now? Why didn't they call me 3 months ago? You know what I mean? Like, that's because I'm a human being too. And this has been a very, very difficult journey for me. It isn't like, oh, wow, you know, it's been a difficult journey. And so sometimes I have to deal with my own feelings around that. But I'm also aware that there was a time that I didn't know what I know now. And that there are people who don't know what they don't know. And so if I'm really going to do my own healing and give people information so they can do their own healing, then I need to come at it at a place where I can meet people where they are and do the best that I can with that. But it's going to take compassion, and heaven help us, the big F word that nobody wants to talk about, forgiveness. And that's huge. When people feel like they have been abused for centuries, it's a huge thing to ask of people. But we need to do this work together. We need to do the work together. So it's hard, and it's you know, it's, believe me, I understand the anger, but you have to remember that people don't know what they don't know, and that they have lived under a very specific umbrella because that is where they're needed, okay? And it has to do with all this other stuff that we don't have time to go into right now because we only have an hour and a half. But, okay, next question.
Great.
I hope that helps. That helps.
Clifford, you're up, and then Zobita after Clifford.
Hi. As I've been looking at this, what keeps coming to me as the owner of a white owned business is that there's something very central about ownership and power. I was hearing someone speak the other day on and wait, first of all, thank you for your mercy. I just newly turned in. Thank you. I'm weeping for the mercy you're expressing. Thank you. Could you speak some about ownership and power? Because it's sort of coalescing around that. In other words, if I'm really going to offer any power or any equality to people of color in my business, really, I need to be talking about ownership, not just here, I'm going to help you with this, or I'm going to give you this money or something. Could you talk about that, please?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the ways that whites have been given privilege, which really is access and possibilities for creating the kind of life that they want, is through ownership. And but what that meant was that people of color, and particularly Blacks, were being divested. Okay, so for instance, DC, Washington DC, I live in the DC area, and DC had a law that Blacks were not allowed to own a storefront. Remember, you institutionalize it, right? Then you set up systems to uphold it, and then everybody acts out of it, right? So you were not allowed to own a storefront. You could, if you were a vendor, you could have a cart that was pulled by one horse. You weren't allowed to have two horses to pull your cart. Or you could pull it yourself. And we see pictures of Black folks pulling a cart behind them, okay? When it comes to housing, traditionally, Black folks have not been given access to loans to buy a home, to loans to start a business. So all of those things. So there are people who come to this country who, they made a deal with our government and they come into the country and they're given money to start businesses, or they don't have to pay taxes for 7 years, and all these things are made. And so they look at the Black community and they go, well, my family did it, why can't they? Because they don't understand that there have been laws in the books forever that do not allow for Black ownership in one form or another. As a leader, having awareness of that, because I think that sometimes, and I'm not speaking to you directly, I'm speaking in general, that sometimes people look at the Black community and they go, well, why aren't they doing more? Well, we've institutionalized them to not do more. And nobody talks about it from that perspective, right? And so now here you come as a leader wanting to make a difference. And you're wondering, well, how can I share leadership, right? Or how can I bring more people of color into my boardroom? Or how can I, as a leader, uphold the diversity initiatives of my organization? So the first thing is become racially literate, becoming more educated and learning as much as you can about the history that has kept people from ownership to begin with, right? The other thing is having conversations with people and looking at, because everybody's an individual, right? And who do we want in leadership in our organization based on what their talents are, right? Being aware of the fact that we look at people through the eyes of the myth, right? The stereotypes, whether we're conscious of it or not, no matter how well-meaning. I mean, I do it sometimes, So it's like, it's just being aware, right? And then looking at what is the strategy, like what are you trying to accomplish, right? Because you have to, it's sort of like not, oh, I'm just going to let some people of color into leadership in my organization. It's like, what's the goal? What's the goals of the organization? Because it isn't just to let more people of color into leadership, right? It's about the business piece, right? So understanding the business case for racial equity is extremely important as a leader. And so that you're then bringing in the talent that then allows for those people to be successful in that business, which means more success for you, more success for them. And it also allows for the other people in the organization to understand that in this organization, we honor the talent. Because unfortunately, because of the stereotypes and all the stuff that people have been fed, very often people, first of all, they hire for comfort, right? And if people aren't feeling comfortable with a person of color, they're probably not going to hire them. And the other thing is that the perception is, oh, those people can't do technology. Oh, they can't do math. Because the stories that have been told is, those are the stories, right? But that's not true and that's not truth, right? I mean, that's why movies like, what is that movie, Kip, where the women help with NASA? With I forget the name of them.
Hidden Figures.
Hidden Figures. There are all of these Black and brown scientists and mathematicians. Like RNA was discovered by, I believe he's a Puerto Rican man. Like, you know, we have this perception of what a scientist looks like, and it has to do with the myth, right? So it's really looking at what is the organizational strategy? Who do we want in leadership in this organization, and looking at the people of color as also part of those who can lead the organization, and really garnering the wealth that comes from that diversity. Because remember, those of us who have had to live in the trenches, right, bring with us a level of resilience that cannot be replaced. It cannot be replaced. And a level of knowledge and awareness that cannot be replaced, because we've been forced into it. It isn't even like we just signed up for it. You know what I'm saying? We've been forced into it. And so as a result, what we bring to an organization is irreplaceable. It's irreplaceable. So creating an organization that is welcoming of people of color strengthens the organization, brings, it literally enhances your bottom line, because people are more comfortable in those organizations. They're more willing to be there. And then they can bring all this incredible talent that people have had to hide under a bushel just to get a job to feed the family. You know what I mean? As opposed to getting a job where they can thrive, where they can be the person that they came on this planet to be. Each one of us brings like immense wealth, you know, and people just want an opportunity to bring that wealth forth. So how do you develop a strategy, a map that allows you to then bring in all this incredible talent of people who sometimes are sitting at home going, how am I going to get a job now? Who's going to hire me now? You know what I mean? Like, you know, to be in a position where you can do that, it isn't just that person's life that you're touching. It's their family. It's their friends. It's their ability to buy a house where they couldn't before, you know, by being well paid for their labor. It's you as a leader are in a position to transform lives. So I just, you know, I thank you for caring enough to be on this call and for wanting to make a difference in your organization. I thank you for that, you know, and one of the best things you can do is to create a team and bringing in people of color to help you create that strategy, so that it isn't somebody in a vacuum creating that strategy. It's co-created by all of the people in the organization and the people that you bring in who can bring in this wealth of information and resilience. So I'm grateful for you and your leadership. Thank you for that.
Thank you for your wisdom.
Thanks, Clifford. Zabita, you're up.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, Milagros. Hi, Kip.
Hi.
Thank you so much for doing these webinars. It's so appreciated. It's really, I tell you what, I'm so grateful I found you. You know, you brought some sanity back to my life. You know, seriously.
Thank you so much.
You put across very challenging issues that are very, very hurtful, painful, but you put it over so graciously, so humane, so intelligently, and so loving. And I haven't seen that combination. That's a rare combination and a gift to have. So I thank you so deeply for that. I really do. And I'm sure everyone feels the same as I do. We're all hugging you right now. So
I'll take a hug. Yes.
Yeah. I really love you. I would like to ask you, because I'm of Indian ancestry, and where I am in Spain, I would often go out and I will be the only brown person, any of color at all, wherever I go. And it's very challenging we have an inbuilt resilience, but how do we continue with that resilience and build it in the face of the reality we live in? Like where I am, I've experienced a lot of racism. Go to the police where they're supposed to protect you, to only experience aggression and racism for them, so not feeling safe. Because I don't want to be formed by how I'm being treated. I don't want to allow that to make me feel I'm less and I don't have value and I don't have worth. So how, when I'm faced with such circumstances around me, is how do we nurture resilience and value and self-esteem when everything is kind of against me, and lots of the people as well. So I really appreciate to know that.
Yeah, thank you for asking. So this is lifelong learning, right? And we, because we're learning and we're studying, that doesn't mean that the toxicity out there is gone, right? So we still have to deal with the toxicity. So we have to learn to self-care. For me, self-caring was my art. Self-caring was meditation. Finding books that are, okay, let me say something about that. I'm going to botch this quote, but I'm sure when I say it, you'll know what I'm talking about. So Einstein said, basically, and I'm paraphrasing, you cannot solve your problems with the same consciousness that made it, okay? And so in order to self-care, you literally have to create a new consciousness, or you have to travel to a new consciousness. The greatest gift we've been given is the gift of imagination. So learning to self-care means asking yourself what you need in order to stay sane and in order to stay healthy. Like for me, it's my walks in the woods, my meditation, my creating a life that supports my self-care and my self-love. Because I know that the outside world is not going to do that for me, right? So creating ways and being in gratitude, because that changes your frequency. That literally changes your vibrational frequency. So even when you're experiencing, this is going to be really difficult for some of you to absorb, but just hear me for a minute. Even when you are experiencing people who make life difficult for you, if you can find a way to be grateful for what you are learning from those people, what they're showing you about themselves and what they're showing you about you and about the world and about your ability to choose once again. A Course in Miracles, I love that book, says choose once again. When you begin to do that, you literally start, first of all, you put endorphins into your body, okay? So that's gonna help you to feel better. But what it also does is it begins to disempower the world around you and brings the power back to you. So it's a practice, and it's like everything else is a muscle, right? So you have to develop that muscle. So I don't expect that you're going to do this and it's going to work for you just like that today, right? It might, okay? It could. But if you begin to create possibilities of being in a world that is loving, nurturing, and supportive of you, in spite of what the world really is, okay? So this is why the imagination is so important. And you start living out of that, it'll get endorphins flowing into your body, which will help you to feel better. And then that becomes the practice, so that when you have to encounter those things, you will very quickly be able, the resiliency goes up, and you'll be able to very quickly get back to yourself, okay? Because those things throw us because they're not part of our natural spirit, okay? When we encounter the racism and all that stuff, that's completely counter who we are as human beings, right? So if you're having to encounter it on a regular basis, you need to be able to pull back in self-care on a regular basis. And as you do more and more of that, you'll become stronger and stronger within yourself. And once you become your own authority, what will happen is that the crazies won't throw you into personal chaos. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying. I know it sounds like I'm an abstract painting and I'm speaking like an abstract, out of abstract, but it really is a practice just like I had you experience the word peace.
Yeah.
Using that as a practice, using words of affirmation as a practice, breathing slowly in and out, really slowly, breathing in and out of your heart. Look up the Heart Math Institute because it'll give you a lot of information about research on the human heart. So there are a lot of things that you can do that can be self-nurturing and self-caring, because the toxicity is still there and it's still going to be there tomorrow. Okay, so part of being brave and being able to face life as it is acknowledging the fact that it is what it is. Okay, and right now I need to pull away and I need to self-care. Extremely important in this process, especially right now, because there's so much going on. So I hope that helps you, Savita.
That does. Thank you. That was perfectly clear. Thank you so much. I really
You're very
appreciate that. Thank you.
Very welcome.